Hello, I'm Faye Kwan and you're watching It's About Youth, where we speak to Malaysia's younger generation on what matters to them ahead of GE15. Today we're looking at women representation in politics. Now, women make up half of the electoral roll in Malaysia, yet they still find themselves underrepresented in the political arena. In fact, in the 2018 elections, out of 687 candidates who stood for parliamentary seats, only 75 were women. Here to discuss this further, we have Izzana Salleh, co-founder of Project Girls for Girls, as well as Aeslinn Noel from Undi 18. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Right, now to start off, current data shows that 15% of seats in Dewan Rakyat are only held by women. Even less than that are women who are in the youth category. So Izzana, perhaps you could break it down for us. How do our figures in Parliament compare to other countries?
Sure. Firstly, Faye, thank you so much for having us. It's always a delight to be here. This is not a new topic. I noticed that the media is really picking up on this, on pushing for more women candidates, and you're absolutely right. We have less than 15% in Dewan Rakyat, and sometimes even less in cabinet, depends on how bloated the cabinet size is, right? And to be perfectly frank with you, data shows that we're at the bottom 10% globally in terms of where we stand with our political participation. We're really good in education, we're really good in healthcare and everything else. It's the political representation that brings us down. So if I can share with you some numbers, how other countries, which, if you think about it, you would think, oh, maybe Malaysia should be at a better standing. We're actually far worse off. So I'll throw some countries to you. Number one, Rwanda, for example. They, at the moment, they have about 49% of women in parliament. That's almost half. Mm-hmm. And how did they do that? Constitutional amendment. In the year 2003, they made a mandate for there to be at least 30% women in parliament, but boom, you get 49%, because when you open up the obstacles, when you clear the obstacles, yeah, women come in droves. Where else? We've got South Africa. They went from 2% in parliament in 1990 to 42% 25 years later, also because of their constitutional amendment, Bolivia, they went from 9% in 1990 to 53% today. Mm-hmm. So, having more women in parliament, we've got the candidates, we've got capable women and young women to be able to deliver. It's all about whether the people making the policies, the ones who are in the positions of power today, if they're actually going to fight for it.
Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of political will, really.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And we see that we are still severely lagging behind globally. Aeslinn, would like to get your thoughts on this. As part of the youth movement that is Undi 18, what we say is the youth's take on gender equality, especially in the political realm.
Thank you for having us on the show. I think youths typically tend to be more well-informed and more aware of the need to have diverse representation, especially in the political arena. So in the past 20 years, we've seen in the global political scale, we've seen way more representation, and not just in terms of gender. I think that the same way we enjoy seeing people on TV and in media who look like us, who talk like us, and who think like us, it's also just as important, if not more important, to have representatives, to have MPs, to have people on our local councils who truly represent us. And so, as more young women are empowered in Malaysia, it's important to have representatives who mirror that.
Mm-hmm. So the youth they are aware of the gender gap in politics, basically, and they want to see more younger female candidates just like them out there. But Izzana, like you mentioned earlier, there's a bit of red tape when it comes to this. What are some of the obstacles that we're facing to make this a reality?
I would say there's a misguided perception that younger people and women are not as prioritized an asset as, say, the people in power, the men, right, the older men. Because you think about it, when you look at political structures, for example, they consider women or younger men wings, but everyone else is sort of the holding company, right? Which shouldn't be the case. As Aeslinn mentioned, we want representation who looks and sounds like us. Yeah. And women make 49-50% of our population. We understand the issues. We go through it daily. And sometimes when you don't experience it, how do you legislate for people that need you to push for more, say, fixing of the double burden syndrome, motherhood penalty, things like that. And not to say you can't theoretically understand it, but we want women, we want young people to bring up issues. Earlier, before the session started, you had asked Aeslinn, what are the topics you like to bring up? And she brought up some topics which I think if you ask someone who is not a young woman,
It might be different.
it would be totally different. So perspective, experience is really important in making sure that Malaysia can become a better first-class nation, which we absolutely have the potential to.
I really agree. That's a good point when you talk about political parties and how women tend to, and youth tend to be in a separate wing rather than just the main leadership.
Why are we not an entire entity? That tells you how they position us. Oh, this is like your training ground. No, we must be an entire entity. You must look at us as someone who brings equal value. Different, but equal.
I'd like to add on to that because I think in Malaysia, in the political parties that we have here, the women's wing, as you mentioned, is actually a large part of what often leads to the success of a political party. The campaigning, the outreach that the women's wing does in reaching out to the women of the country. And the political party would not have success without it. So why are we being put as a separate wing when we should be part of the holistic approach? I agree.
That's a very good point made over there. But when we talk about women in political parties, we don't see many of them in politics in the first place. To either of you, why do you think women aren't as enticed to join politics as compared to men?
I would recommend maybe a different perspective. I don't think that they're not enticed. I think when we go on the ground, you see so many women across all parties. In fact, even in NGOs, they are roaring and ready to represent. But there's both systemic and cultural obstacles. However, I noticed that a lot of young women no longer see these obstacles. They're persisting, they're fighting through, and they're able to break through whatever ceilings that are there. So there are many women who are interested. It's just breaking some of these systemic situations and perhaps getting the older generation to go with the flow when it comes to cultural change.
And Aeslinn, maybe you could weigh in on this. So what we've been talking about so far, how crucial is it for political parties to really acknowledge the gender bias or the gender gap in politics?
I think when it comes to any issue, to solve a problem, you have to first acknowledge that it exists. The first step is to admit that there is a gender bias and that there is unfair treatment of men and women in the political arena. So as you mentioned earlier in GE15, out of the 687 candidates in parliament, only 75 were women. I think Izzana had some numbers earlier about women in parliament. We only have 15% of the Dewan Rakyat that is women when the international target is 30%. So we're still lagging behind. And I think it's quite glaring that there is a gender bias going on in Malaysian politics. But as we just talked about, even with this lack of representation, women are still the backbone of the government. There are so many women in key positions in civil service and the women's wing. So I think to go forward and to continue breaking the barriers and the systemic obstacles, we need to acknowledge that there is a gender bias.
So then having more women in parliament, what do you guys think this would look like? Is it a 50-50 divide like Rwanda, for example? What are your thoughts? How should this look like?
I think if our leadership has guts, it would straight look like parity in politics. You would see 50-50. But as we have seen, and why media is pushing shows and conversations like this with us, is because we've been talking about 30%, which is actually, for me, a discount to what we are worth for the last 20 years. And still, we're inching, still at 14.9%. We haven't even hit that 15%. So if we have leadership with guts, it would look like parity in politics. But I understand that change takes time. There's a transformation in the mindset that needs to happen. Generational, cultural change needs to happen. Okay. So what should happen actually is in Parliament, we must target for 30% coming up. That means that when we're fielding candidates in this upcoming elections, you probably need to target a little bit higher because there is that chance that not all seats are won, right? Yeah. So if you are true and honest and sincere about hitting that 30% at least in Parliament, you've got to feel more than that.
At least. And what about you, Aeslinn? What are your thoughts on this?
I think I agree with what Izzana said for sure. In order to hit the minimum target, you have to aim higher. And if we can hit higher, then that's a win, right? Yeah.
In fact, if I may add, in some of the countries, when they started putting the constitutional amendment, like in Rwanda, they said 30%. At the end of the year, they hit 49%. So all we need is just understanding and embrace of this whole concept. Women will come in droves. Definitely, there's a lot of women out there who are ready, raring, and will be good at the work.
So even if we set a quota with the constitutional amendment, we may even see it exceeding our expectations.
I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will.
Yes, so it's really just encouraging women, giving them the platform and the freedom to just pursue this. And, they do make a significant number of our population, half of our population, and so they should also have half a say in our policies and what we do for the country. Right, well, there's lots more to talk about, but we'll go for a quick break first. Stay with us. Welcome back to It's About Youth, where we're speaking about women representation with Izzana Salleh, co-founder of Project Girls for Girls, as well as Aeslinn Noel from Undi 18. Now, previously, we talked about obstacles women face in participating in politics, as well as the youth's take on this. And as Aeslinn has mentioned, that the youth see this as a critical issue for us to address in light of GE15. And with elections approaching us, the Election Commission has announced that Nomination Day will be on November 5th. So ahead of this, Aeslinn, perhaps we can start with you. What do you think is the importance of fielding more young female candidates this time round?
I think the purpose of the candidates, the adjuns and the MPs, is to speak for the people they're representing. And they in Parliament they discuss issues, they make policies, they make new laws to represent the people. And there should be as big a variety of candidates as possible in order to represent as many types of people as possible, because Malaysia is such a diverse country. How can we have just a small percentage, a small group of people shaping the country when there's so many of us to represent? So I think it's important that we diversify Parliament and we continue to open up the candidates to more and more types of people, more young women, so that it's not just an echo chamber of the same ideas and the same opinions bouncing around and around. We need new ideas, we need people considering new things, new policies when it comes to the youth and when it comes to young women. So I also believe that in the run-up to GE15, parties should definitely consider fielding more young women candidates, not just to field them, but to also provide them with the resources and the funding so that they can actually win the seats. I think, as Izzana mentioned earlier, when we set a quota, we should aim a little bit higher just because they may not win all the seats. But I think parties should really put in the effort, put in the resources to these women candidates so that they can win the seats and that they can go on to diversify Parliament.
I'll go back to that topic later on, how we can empower our female candidates. But when talking about earlier about how you say, women, these new MPs to come in to propose new laws, new policies, having more women in Parliament, maybe Izzana, you can take this one. You can help us understand what's the importance of having a gender-based Parliament, and how will having more women in the Dewan Rakyat affect our policies?
So there's power in the collective voice, and I think that when we're bringing up issues in Parliament that say cater to and address the needs of your women population, there has to be not just one person who understands the issue. So for example, when we're talking about the citizenship issue, I'm sure media is extremely well aware of the issues being brought up by Family Frontiers. I know that there's been several parties that bring up this issue, but for some reason there isn't enough collective voice by the leadership to push this through. There are so many ways, but what we're hearing are there's a lot of excuses. I know that there's a lot of very strong women out there who's attempting, but unfortunately the voices of dissent is a little bit higher. That's one. Another example is, for example, when you're talking about, say, gender responsive budgets. I think the one that was presented before the Pembubaran Parliament was, yes, a gender responsive budget, but there's more that can be done. For example, talking about, say, the care economy. In Malaysia, and this is maybe slightly older women, this burden lies on the shoulder of women who need to care. So we know this conversation about caring for the young and the issues of it just being biased on one parent, the mother, but now we talk about care economy. That is on the shoulder of a lot of working women or even non-working women. It's extremely difficult. It's financially, physically, emotionally exhausting. What are the policies out there that will help support these women so that they can actually utilize their capacity and capabilities to help build this country? So, you know, for example, NHS system in the UK, they have very strong support when it comes to care economy. So how about talking about putting things like that? So it's just, you know, bringing your experience from the home and the difficulties you have maybe caring for your mother or father who's aging, bringing that into policies that we make maybe in healthcare or something of that sort, right? But the conversation needs to happen.
Yeah, it's not mentioned.
I'd just
so
like to
much.
add on to that, if that's okay. I think women leaders enable societal shift in a new perspective, especially when you have a patriarchal society like Malaysia, where we're so used to taking direction, to just accepting things that come from the men in charge. You know, we need young women to step up because we have different ideas. I mean, take New Zealand, for example. Their Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she's had so many new policies that really put women and children at the forefront and of society. I think she's even implemented some climate change bills, and women, there's always the argument, I think, that women cannot be in positions of power because we're too emotional. But I think sometimes you do need an emotional approach in these things. You need a fresh set of ideas that men may not come up with.
A really different perspective. And I love how you point out Jacinda Ardern, because you know, when we talk about the care economy, at the same time she's normalizing bringing your child to work, or you know, having your kid on your lap while you're attending a Zoom meeting. And it's insane just how, you know, it's all the responsibility falls onto the woman, and in that sense then sometimes she can't pursue her political or her professional career. So maybe in this context then, how, you know, going back to what you said, Aeslinn, how can we convince our leaders to really address the political gender gap and maybe promote more women in leadership roles?
So to be honest with you, this is a bit of a concern that I've had for a couple of years, and one of the reasons why I did one of our RISE conferences last year. In this conversation, there's 3 women here, but the person in power is a man. So the buy-in, yes, we are here, we're advocating for this mindset shift, but the person who's going to make a direct impact is the leader who is in the formal position of power. So I think firstly there needs to be a buy-in from these people who can impact immediate change. So the people in this conversation needs to be them, so that then they can make public announcements, public promises, and actually deliver on them that constitute these changes. We can advocate and we can push about this topic, but at the end of the day, we're preaching to the choir. A lot of women today, especially those who are feeling the pain of not having our representation, people who look like us out there, we understand this. But at the end of the day, if it's the person who is in that formal position to make the changes in the policy, if they're not sitting here and they don't believe or embrace in it, we're preaching to the choir. We need them here in this position. So that's from a high-level mindset shift. But of course, at the end of the day, it's about making changes. And for me, I think straight constitutional amendment is what we need, because like I mentioned earlier, we've been having this conversation for 2 decades. Since I was a young girl, you know, I've been listening to this 30% conversation for far too long. I'm sure we'd like to talk about parity in politics, 50%, right? 30% for me feels a little, it's passé, but
It's just the starting point.
So aspirationally, we should be talking 50%. Let's make a constitutional amendment to showcase that we're serious about this, because quotas and targets have not worked. Or they have. Sorry, let me take that back. They have. It's just a little bit slow. If other countries can do it, so that means that why we mentioned the other countries to show benchmark, right? That it is possible when you can leverage on the right power. When the person at the top says yes, go, it will jalan. And I think that's really important.
So once again, it really comes back to political will, as we've been talking about. But I can't help but wonder, beyond, depending on our leaders, Aeslinn, maybe you can start off with this first. How else can we empower young women to first start off in political decision-making spaces?
I think thankfully nowadays, especially now with the conversation of gender equality, widening globally, there are so many more opportunities for women and for girls to participate in leadership roles, in campaigns, in programs. I mean, Izzana, your project Girls for Girls, even with Undi 18, we had the 111 initiative and the Siri Kandi program, which was a series of workshops and forums aiming to just empower, educate, and activate young women to want to participate politically. So I think beyond capacity building and organizing workshops, we also need to come from a perspective of we need to listen to the women around us. It starts small, it starts with the people around you. Listen to the women around you, make them feel safe, make them feel heard. And by doing that, you enable them to continue to break the glass ceilings in their lives. And when enough women break each of our own glass ceilings, I break mine, you break yours, the overarching glass ceiling starts to crack. It disappears because we've all conquered the little things, the little obstacles in our lives, and that's what leads to bigger change, I think.
If I may jump in on that, you mentioned what we do at Girls for Girls, so just a little plug-in. We're a mentoring initiative, and we are doing this mentoring initiative to help young women build the courage, vision, and skills to pursue leadership positions. And what's interesting is that what we do is done across in 26 different countries. And what I've realized as I sit in through calls around the different countries, our issues are the same. So what we're going through here,
it's universal.
It's universal. Issues are the same, mindset is the same, but gaining confidence and gaining the skills to be able to step into public leadership can be done. We have seen it. So I also want to share with you, there was an initiative, I think last year, called Parlimen Wanita Muda, right? I really love it because it helps to simulate the whole experience, fully young women candidates, I would say. And I remember there was one of our mentees in Girls for Girls Malaysia. She went on to sign up for Parlimen Wanita Muda. She ran for that, and now she's taken it into actual local council activity. So to tie in what Aeslinn was saying and what we do, when you're able to give all these workshops, give them the confidence and the skills, then to pursue taking what they've learned onto the ground, you see the women come in droves. They will be there, they are ready, there's plenty of them, and then out into the real field.
So essentially it's starting at the community level and then building up, really empowering them through workshops and letting them test the waters to see if they like it, empowering them with knowledge, and then that's how they can step up from there.
I think we're not opposed to young women going straight up too.
We're not.
But having those things, there are many tools, support systems out there, 111 Initiative, Girls for Girls, Parlimen Wanita Muda, and many more. But I would support also some women going straight to the top.
Absolutely, I would too.
I think it definitely helps to, the first thing is to tackle the mindset that, I can't do this because I'm a woman. But when you give women simulations, you give them workshops, they realize, hold up, I can do this.
Yeah,
I
exactly,
can. And that empowers them to continue going further up in the decision-making process, I think.
That's one of the things we do at Girls for Girls. So we have a session on negotiations, and 70% of women don't negotiate their salary, especially their first salary, and that's one of the contributors to the gender wage gap that we have, right? a lot of women, when we talk to employers, they accept whatever the HR team gives them. So we do a lot of role play. And at the end of it, I would say they're real hustlers when it comes to negotiating the salary. So it's really nice to see. And that tallies with what you say when you give them the space to role play, because there's all these cultural boundaries before generations. But you give them the ability and they realize their power.
They can, yes.
You see them bloom and shine, and it's so amazing to see.
That's lovely to hear, honestly. So giving them the space and allowing them to test it out, see what works for them, and for them to realize that yes, they can do it, that women can do it. Lots of great points made here today. Thank you so much for joining us. But unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Till now, I've been speaking to Izzana, Salleh and Aeslinn Noel. Remember, GE15 is set to take place on November 19th, so be sure to exercise your right to vote. Till then, I'm Faye Kwan. Thank you for joining us on It's About Youth. Goodbye.